The Juggernaut could absorb more firepower than any ground vehicle in Star Wars, and it was stopped on every world it ever served. This massive 10-wheel machine, known across the Clone Wars as the Clone Turbo Tank, rolled across dozens of worlds under 2 different galactic governments. The armor held through every era. The machine kept failing anyway, and the reasons had nothing to do with enemy firepower. Its history runs from the beaches of Kashyyyk, the forested home world of the Wookiees, to the jungles of Morak, a remote planet where volatile starship fuel was refined under armed guard. On Kashyyyk, during the final days of the Clone Wars, Republic forces land on the Wookiee home world to defend it against a full separatist offensive. Battle droids, the cheap and disposable machines produced by the millions in the automated factories of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, march across the beach in waves. The Juggernauts roll into the center of it all, the beach shaking beneath them. Clone troopers, the Republic's genetically engineered soldiers grown on the hidden ocean world of Kamino, pour out of the vehicle's lower hatches, while Wookiees, towering furred warriors native to the planet, charge alongside a machine taller than the surrounding tree canopy. Yoda, the ancient Jedi Grand Master, stands on top of one, commanding the defense of an entire sector from the back of a rolling fortress. Smaller Republic walkers called ATAPs, lightweight artillery vehicles barely half the Juggernaut's height, struggle to keep pace beside it. The Separatist landing force stretches across the entire beachhead, wave after wave of droids marching through the surf, and the Juggernaut rolls straight through the center of it. Tanks fire on the hull, and the armor absorbs every hit without slowing down. The vehicle keeps rolling, grinding over terrain and wreckage without changing direction or speed, its 10 wheels churning the sand into clouds that hang in the air behind it. Blaster bolts spark off the hull and leave no marks. Clone troopers on the ground scatter to let the machine through, then fall in behind it. Using the hull as mobile cover against incoming fire, the shadow it casts swallows the ground beneath it. For a few moments in Revenge of the Sith, the vehicle looks like the most powerful thing on the field. It is. The Republic built this machine because it was running out of soldiers. The clone army was unlike any traditional military force. Every single soldier was grown from one genetic template on Kamino, a world so remote that it had been erased from the Jedi archives. Even with accelerated aging, each trooper took years to reach maturity and complete training. The Kaminoan cloners refined every stage of the process, from genetic stability to combat conditioning, but biology itself set the floor. No clone could be fielded in less than a decade of growth time, even with aging acceleration pushed to its limits. Every clone who fell in an engagement was a decade of investment the Republic could not recover, erased in a single firefight. By the final year of the conflict, losses along the front lines were accelerating faster than the facilities on Kamino could compensate. The Separatists faced no such constraint. Their battle droids were cheap machines, stamped out in factories by the millions, treated as entirely disposable. A single Separatist foundry world could produce more units in a month than Kamino could grow in a decade. A downed transport was scrap metal worth less than the bolts holding it together, replaceable by the next morning. The Republic could not absorb losses at anything close to that rate, because every transport carried soldiers who took a decade to grow. The Republic was burning through soldiers it could never replace fast enough against an enemy that replaced every loss by the following afternoon. A squad of clones lost in an ambush represented years of growth and a gap in the front lines that Kamino's vats could not fill before the next offensive began. Every engagement was a gamble the Republic could not afford to lose. The Juggernaut was the Republic's answer to that arithmetic. Every front the Republic opened drained the reserves a little further. Every contested world that needed reinforcements pulled soldiers from a pool that was shrinking faster than it could be replenished. Clone officers watched their battalions thin out engagement by engagement, with no guarantee that replacements would arrive before the next offensive. On the war's fronts, commanders held ground with depleted units for months, knowing that the next major assault could break them entirely. The Republic could not match the Separatists in raw numbers on any front, so it built a vehicle that would make every soldier count for 10. A single machine designed to carry an entire military operation inside its armored hull and keep those soldiers alive long enough to fight again. 300 clone troopers sat sealed across 2 internal decks, an entire company riding in one hull because spreading them across lighter transports meant that any ambush could destroy soldiers the Republic had spent a decade growing. Roof-mounted turrets, rapid-fire laser cannons, and heavy projectile launchers gave the vehicle its own fire support, because on half the planets where clones deployed, no separate artillery unit existed. The Juggernaut was the artillery. A full medical station waited inside because wounded clones had to be stabilized on the spot or they were lost. The sensor suite included an extendable observation mast, turning the vehicle into a command post capable of coordinating forces across an entire sector. Supplies filled the remaining space, enough to sustain operations without resupply for weeks. Heat-dispersing armor plating spread incoming energy across the hull, preventing any single strike from burning through the soldiers inside. All of this packed into a vehicle 49.4 meters long and, despite its mass, capable of reaching over 160 kilometers per hour on open ground, fast enough to keep pace with most armored vehicles in the Republic inventory. The vehicle served as troop transport, artillery platform, field hospital, command center, and supply depot at once. On world after world where clone forces deployed, no artillery waited at the landing zone, and no medical facility stood behind the lines. The nearest supply base might be on the other side of the continent, or it might not exist yet. On contested planets where orbital control shifted by the hour, a ground resupply convoy could be reduced to debris before it reached the front. Reinforcement timelines stretched from weeks to months on the most remote fronts, and some deployments received no resupply at all for the duration of the campaign. The Juggernaut carried everything because everything had to arrive inside one hull or it was not arriving. The soldiers seated in those compartments were worth more to the Republic than the vehicle itself. The vehicle worked. Wherever it deployed, the Juggernaut kept soldiers alive through firefights that would have destroyed any lighter transport. The armor, the weapons, the medical station, the command post all existed because the soldiers inside could not be replaced, and this machine might be the only organized Republic presence on the entire continent, carrying an entire company across terrain where losing even a handful of them could mean losing the entire sector. During the middle stretch of the war, Jedi generals held entire sectors with a handful of battalions, while Separatist command poured fresh divisions into the same zones. The Juggernaut fit that war. The Republic governed thousands of member worlds with billions of citizens. It fought the entire Clone War with an army grown on a single planet. It was built for commanders who had stopped expecting reinforcements and started packing everything into the one hull they could protect. On the day the Republic fell, the clones who had charged out of those hatches that morning received Order 66 through their helmet comms on Kashyyyk. The soldiers who had ridden inside these vehicles for 3 years turned their weapons on the Jedi generals who had stood on top of them. The Juggernaut that had been built to protect those soldiers carried the ones who carried out the betrayal. By nightfall, the vehicle belonged to a different government. The Galactic Empire inherited every Juggernaut in the fleet. The new regime stripped the vehicle to its frame. Troop compartments became holding cells. Medical stations were pulled out. The vehicle rolled back onto the roads of a conquered galaxy, carrying something entirely different behind its armor. The Separatist droid armies were gone. The war was over. This regime had already built the Death Star, a battle station capable of destroying entire planets, and fielded super star destroyers stretching kilometers from bow to stem. AT-ATs, towering four-legged armored walkers the size of apartment buildings, filled the streets of occupied cities. The government had no hesitation about building enormous war machines. It made the Juggernaut smaller. The vehicle that once carried an entire company of soldiers into a war zone was stripped down to carry cargo through pacified territory, and every removed system pointed towards the same function, hauling cargo and prisoners along fixed routes. Occupation had replaced war, and the Juggernaut changed with it. Thousands of worlds had been defeated, their populations folded under a new flag, with no voice in the arrangement. On the Outer Rim, entire systems changed hands during the transition from Republic to Empire with barely a shot fired, and the population that woke under Imperial control had no say in what followed. The ruling power garrisoned each world, extended its resources, moved captives between detention facilities, and maintained armed presence on planets where resistance simmered beneath the surface. Mining operations ran around the clock on resource-rich worlds. Detention centers processed a steady flow of dissidents, and anyone caught organizing resistance At the local level, entire planetary economies were restructured to feed Imperial military production, with local populations conscripted as labor. The new government needed vehicles that could fit through base gates, travel on established roads, dock at loading platforms, and haul cargo and detainees through territory that was hostile but suppressed. A vehicle that could grind down a supply road for hours, absorb whatever hit it along the way, and deliver its cargo to the facility at the other end. The new model, designated the HCVW-A9 turbo tank, was smaller and lighter than the Republic original, carrying fewer weapons but keeping enough armor to survive an ambush and enough speed to outrun anything it could not absorb. The heavy projectile launchers were gone, the extendable observation mast and full sensor suite were gone. The vehicle no longer needed to coordinate an entire sector's defense or provide its own fire support against an armored enemy. It needed to haul cargo down a road and survive anything it encountered along the way. The armor that once protected 300 soldiers now protected whatever the Empire was moving from one end of a supply route to the other. On dozens of occupied worlds, these vehicles moved along fixed supply routes between garrisons, refineries, and detention facilities, grinding down roads built barely wide enough to hold them. On most days, the cargo was prisoners or fuel. The vehicle ran the same routes on the same schedules, week after week, connecting the infrastructure of occupation across the Outer Rim. On Wobani, a barren world housing an Imperial detention center, the conversion became impossible to miss. In the Canon film Rogue One, Jyn Erso, a young woman held for offenses against the Imperial government, rides shackled inside an HCVW-A9. The vehicle is transferring her between facilities, rolling her from one cage to another along a dusty road surrounded by barren terrain and Imperial guard towers. Dust rises in clouds behind the hull. The only sound inside the hold is the vibration of the plating and the clinking of restraints. The command post and medical station are gone. The interior holds restraints and bare metal walls. Erso is one of several prisoners in the hold, pressed together on bare metal benches bolted along the walls. Her hands are locked in front of her. The vehicle rocks beneath her as it grinds along the road. The space that once carried 300 armed clone troopers now carries captives in chains. No one inside this vehicle is going to a battle. They're being delivered from one facility to the next, the same route every week, the same dust cloud beneath the hull every time. In the Canon animated series The Bad Batch, an Imperial Juggernaut rolls across a narrow suspension bridge, connecting sections of a mining and labor facility carved into the cliffs of Erebus, a remote planet stripped for resources. The bridge groans with every pass, the full weight of the vehicle testing a span never designed for a machine of this size. Cable supports vibrate under the strain. The cliffs on either side drop hundreds of meters into darkness, and workers crossing on foot press against the railings as the hull rumbles past. The vehicle is wider than the walkway alongside the bridge, and anyone caught between the hull and the railing has nowhere to go. Armed guards stand at each end of the bridge, but their attention is on the workers, not the vehicle. The Juggernaut shuttles workers and extracted materials between the mine and the barracks, one moving part inside an operation, stripping a world down to bedrock. The guards at the checkpoint wave it through without a second look. On this world, the Juggernaut has become a piece of mining equipment. Morak is where the Juggernaut's role in the occupation becomes impossible to ignore. In the canon series The Mandalorian, Din Djarin, a lone bounty hunter on a mission to rescue his foundling, and Mix Mayfeld, a former Imperial sharpshooter carrying years of bitterness towards his old employers, hijack an Imperial Juggernaut on the jungle planet of Morak. The vehicle is hauling rhydonium, a volatile fuel used to power starships, and the cargo is so dangerously unstable that driving too fast risks setting off an explosion that would leave nothing behind. The Juggernaut looks like a fuel truck here, grinding down a single jungle road with explosive cargo sealed in its belly. A small escort of Imperial transport vehicles flanks the convoy, but the jungle narrows the formation to a single file within minutes of leaving the depot. The jungle presses in from both sides as the convoy crawls forward. Vines scrape the hull. The road is barely wide enough for a single Juggernaut to pass, and the canopy overhead blocks the sky, trapping the heat and engine noise in a green tunnel that stretches towards the refinery. Ahead of them, two other Juggernauts are brought down by local fighters, people who live on Morak and want the occupation off their planet. They swarm out of the tree line, scaling the hull, throwing themselves at a machine many times their size. Jaren climbs out the top hatch to fight on the roof of a moving vehicle with rhydonium in the cargo bay beneath his feet. One misstep from falling under the wheels himself. He runs out of blaster bolts, fights with a metal staff, and throws one of the fighters off the side of the hull. Another fighter plants an explosive charge on the rear plating. The blast rocks the vehicle but does not breach the armor. Below him, the vehicle keeps rolling because the rhydonium will detonate if it sits in the heat. Inside the cab, Mayfeld watches the temperature gauge on the rhydonium climb towards critical. Every impact on the roof, every jolt of the road sends the needle closer to the red line, and crossing it means the vehicle and everything inside it vanishes in a fireball. The gauge ticks upward with every passing minute. Kilometers of road still separate the convoy from the refinery, and fighters determined to stop it remain ahead. TIE fighters, the fast single-pilot craft of the Empire, arrive in the final seconds and scatter the remaining fighters with strafing runs along the tree line, saving the last surviving transport in the convoy. The rhydonium reaches the refinery as the escort peels away. The jungle goes quiet again, at least until the next convoy rolls down the same road, carrying the same cargo towards the same refinery. If this is the kind of Star Wars content you enjoy, a quick subscribe means you will always be first to know when the next one drops. The Empire kept the AT-AT, the towering four-legged walker, as its public face, casting shadows over civilian populations to discourage resistance before it started. No one built propaganda around the Juggernaut. The Juggernaut rolled behind the front lines, out of public view, hauling fuel and prisoners along supply routes that never appeared in any Imperial broadcast. Every refinery, every garrison, every labor facility along the route depended on the Juggernaut to keep rolling, and that dependence is exactly what Rebel strategists targeted. Rebel strategists classify the Juggernaut as a logistical target. In the canon reference book The Rebel Files, it appears as a convoy asset whose destruction could starve a refinery or cut a labor facility off from its supply line entirely. The planners who study these convoys understood that the Juggernaut was nearly impossible to destroy in a direct engagement, but the operation it served was fragile. Destroy the convoy, and everything downstream went dark. Imperial doctrine reached the same conclusion, classifying the Juggernaut alongside supply vehicles and garrison transports. The vehicle itself was secondary. The supply chain it fed was the real target. On any given day, a Juggernaut's cargo hold carried prisoners being transferred between detention centers or volatile fuel bound for the Imperial fleet. Extracted ore went in another direction, rolling towards processing plants where raw materials were refined into durasteel for warship construction, projects the populations who mined the ore would never benefit from. Across the Outer Rim, dozens of these convoys ran simultaneously on dozens of occupied worlds. The cargo changed from planet to planet, but the vehicle's function stayed fixed. Move what the Empire consumed along roads it controlled by force. The armor held through every era the Juggernaut served. Energy absorption systems dampened direct hits and distributed the force across the vehicle's frame. Composite layering beneath the outer plating added a second line of defense against penetrating rounds. The armor was thick enough to shrug off anti-vehicle fire that would have shredded any other ground transport in the same theater of operations. The machine was stopped anyway. On multiple worlds, across both eras, fighters with far less firepower found ways to disable vehicles that heavy artillery could not touch. Terrain locked it in place, the armor held every time, and the vehicle failed regardless, brought down by the wheels, hatches, and routes it depended on. No vehicle exists sealed off from the world it moves through. The Juggernaut has 10 wheels that must grip the ground, hatches that must open for loading and unloading, viewports where crew members need to see, and steering mechanisms that translate commands into the movement of a 49-meter machine across uneven terrain. It has maintenance panels, exhaust ports, supply dependencies, and predictable routes it cannot deviate from. Every one of those contact points is a gap between the armored interior and the uncontrolled environment outside, and each one was discovered and exploited by someone who spent enough time studying the machine. On open ground, the Juggernaut chose its own path and presented a moving target that shifted with every decision. Dense jungle and narrow mountain roads locked the vehicle to a fixed route. The vehicle followed whatever ground would hold its weight. The roads built wide enough to accommodate it, and anyone watching long enough could predict exactly where it would pass and when. On some worlds, the Juggernaut's route was the only paved road for hundreds of kilometers. The wheels needed to flex against terrain to grip the ground. The hatches needed to open for cargo and crew. The viewports needed to stay clear for the driver to navigate. The gaps can never be sealed because sealing them would make the vehicle unable to function. Every hatch, viewport, and wheel assembly exists because the Juggernaut needs it to operate, and removing any one of them would cripple the vehicle as effectively as an enemy attack. During the engagement at Meridian, an armored column learned that lesson firsthand. In the Legends comic series Empire, set shortly after the fall of the Republic, an Imperial column pushes deep into territory sacred to the Amanin, tall and powerful reptilian warriors who have inhabited the planet's grasslands for generations. The Amanin fight with spears, bladed tools, and whatever blasters they have captured from previous invaders. They declare the column enemies in a ritual conflict they intend to win on their own terms, using every advantage the terrain gives them. The grasslands are their home ground, and they know every ridge and depression in the landscape. The column's commander expects the Amanin to scatter once the Juggernauts advance. The warriors hold their ground and begin adapting instead. They study the column as it moves, watching how the vehicles maneuver and where the crews expose themselves. Within hours, they've identified the pattern. The hull absorbs everything, but the crew inside still needs to see. The Amanin begin targeting the crew directly. An officer named Bex commands one of the column's Juggernauts, an older model designated the HAVWA-5. His vehicle is armored on every surface except the cockpit viewport. The Amanin notice. They stop firing at the plating and concentrate every ranged weapon they have on that viewport, the one spot where a human being has to see outside the hull. Bex falls through the shattered glass. His Juggernaut is overrun and disabled, brought down by fighters who identified the one gap in the hull where the crew was exposed. The column's entire advance stalls around the wreck of a single vehicle, its armor intact on every surface except the one that mattered. The Amanin needed no heavy weapons. They needed patience and a clear view of the cockpit. On Wobani, the weakness turned out to be a door. The Juggernaut carrying Jyn Erso is not breached by heavy firepower. A rebel extraction team designated Bravo forces open the lower hatch, a door designed for loading and unloading detainees during transfer operations. That entrance exists because the vehicle has to let people in and out. A transport that cannot open cannot function as a transport, and every loading hatch on the Juggernaut is a point where the sealed interior meets the outside world. The rebels push through it, storm the interior while the vehicle is still moving, overwhelm the guards in the hold, and pull Erso free before the escort can close the distance. The hull is untouched. The rebels came through a door the vehicle could not function without. On Morak, the weakness is the route itself. The Rhydonium convoy follows a single jungle road from the depot to the refinery. The fighters who strike already know the path. A transport this size on a planet with one usable road has exactly one route, no detour, no alternate path through the jungle. The fighters set up along the road and wait. 2 of the 3 transports in the convoy are brought down before the refinery gate comes into view. The wheels were the one system that can never be protected. 10 separately mounted wheels sit outside the armored hull at all times. They cannot be fully encased because they need to contact the ground, rotate on axles, and flex against terrain. Each wheel carries bearings, linkages, and suspension elements connecting the crew's steering commands to the surface below, all exposed to terrain damage and concentrated fire. During the escape from the Erebus labor facility in the Bad Batch, a Juggernaut loses steering control when gunship fire strikes the wheel assembly, shattering the linkages and leaving the vehicle unable to respond to its own crew. The final weakness had nothing to do with the vehicle itself. On Morak, after the surviving Juggernaut delivers its cargo and the infiltration mission is done, Migs Mayfield picks up a long-range rifle aboard the ship of the bounty hunter Boba Fett and fires a single shot into the refinery's Rhydonium stockpile. The entire facility detonates. The fireball rises above the jungle canopy. Everything the convoy endured on that road, the ambush, the rooftop fight, the temperature gauge climbing towards the red line, meant nothing. The Juggernaut survived the run. The refinery was driving towards did not survive a single well-placed rifle shot. One man with a rifle and a clear line of sight erased the entire output of the convoy in under a second. The vehicle was one link in a supply chain of refineries, depots, roads, and maintenance crews, and every other link in that chain was softer than the Juggernaut itself. The refinery had no armor, the road could be blocked or destroyed, and the depot depended on the same unprotected infrastructure as everything else in the chain. The Rhydonium that survived the convoy burned on the ground with everything else in the refinery stockpile. Mayfell destroyed the operation by targeting the one part of it that had no armor at all. General Crix Medine understood these weaknesses from the inside. Medine was a career Imperial officer who commanded ground vehicles before defecting to the Rebel Alliance, where he helped plan the assault on the second Death Star. His defection gave the Alliance something it never had before, a ground commander who had operated the Empire's own vehicles in the field. He had spent years behind the controls of the machines he was now being asked to defeat. Medine left tactical annotations in the Legends Reference Guide Imperial Handbook, and his assessment was direct. The Juggernaut broke down under its own weight. The vehicle's sheer size, the feature that made it so effective as a mobile fortress, gave its enemies more surface area to study and more systems to target than any crew could monitor at once. The roads the vehicle followed were the same roads its enemies mapped for ambush positions, and the schedule the vehicle kept was the same schedule those enemies used to time their attacks. A 49-meter machine running a fixed route on a predictable timetable was the easiest target on the planet for anyone patient enough to watch it. Somewhere on Morak, a burned-out Juggernaut sits on a jungle road with its wheels locked and its cargo bay empty. The refinery was driving towards is already a column of smoke behind the trees. The jungle is closing in around it, vines reaching for the axles, insects crawling across the scorched plating, the canopy stretching overhead to reclaim the road the vehicle once occupied. Its armor remains intact and its hull unbreached. The Republic built this machine to keep soldiers alive. The Empire filled it with prisoners, and now the jungle is taking all of it back. 49 meters of armor, and every version of the Juggernaut was stopped by the places where the armor had to end. The X-Wing starfighter left the ground behind entirely, and what a single pilot craft achieved against the full strength of the Imperial fleet changed the course of the Galactic Civil War. So watch this video to find out.